Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of The Curse, Episode 3, Questa Lane. Now, it opens with Asher with a duffel bag of cash, and he's at an auction, and he is bidding for Questa Lane. And I love that the woman he's talking to there is like, that's a teardown. Can't do anything in that one. And he's just like, good, so don't bid on it. The way he behaves, I just love watching Nathan Fielder when he does this type of humor. And I love he bids for this at 62.5 thousand and he smiles like it's this huge win, even though he was supposed to only go up to 40,000 max. And I love that he looks at the woman with that smirk behind him. And what was great is we see then back at their house, they're watching footage of the focus group who watched their show. And Whitney goes, wait, what did they just laugh at? And Dougie's like, oh, Fernando effing up a latte. It's the only laugh so far. And this focus group is really laying into Asher. One person's like, I like the lady. I do wish that he had a sense of humor or personality. And another person goes, there is zero sexual tension, none. And Asher responds saying, these people are idiots. But Asher starts to really panic when Dougie brings up they might not pick up the show and they can use this as ammunition. Now, there's been a lot of theories in my comments and on Reddit that Dougie isn't even really filming this for HGTV, that HGTV isn't even involved, that he is filming this for himself. And we saw in episode 1 he was trying to film footage of them when they didn't know they were even being filmed, and that we also have seen Dougie make a show that was terrible, that reality show with the burn victim, and it makes sense that his type of character would lie about HGTV's involvement. Now, it's also interesting they film scenes like this from a very voyeuristic perspective, so it makes you also wonder if this is all just being filmed for Dougie's own reasons and not actually for anything for HGTV's involvement. It also could be voyeuristic reasons too, because of this being the show, The Curse, and we know this girl has cursed him, that Asher later on brings up they could have been watching him through the kitchen window. So it might just be alluding to whoever's putting a curse on Asher even more that we don't even know about is watching him from a voyeuristic standpoint. Now Asher's like, why are you even New Mexico? We need solutions now. And he's putting a lot on Dougie here. And this is even why Whitney's like, calm down, Asher. And they still get in these great funny moments where Dougie's like, is it okay if I eat these on the couch, or are you afraid I'm going to stain it? And he's talking about Whitney's blueberries, and he puts his blueberry hand on the couch when he goes to sit down and immediately stains it. And he's like, sorry, that was a mistake. And he gets up and gets rid of the blueberries. But that could also be him trying to get a reaction out of them and filming that. Who really knows at this point? And just the lines this group says is great. Like one says, there's something very off about him talking about Asher. She's like, be hot or funny. He wasn't either to me. And of course, they have this character in the group that's clearly representing someone who is a right-winger, and he's not believing in climate change, and he's literally the only one who raises his hand that he likes the character of Asher in the show. And his response to the show actually makes some of the people like the show now in its point of climate change, and this is actually a win for Whitney in some ways, and that's why it's the only positive they really get out of this focus group. It's also interesting that Dougie through this is suggesting them get dominoes. Now there's two ways to look at this. If you're looking at the perspective of that, he's trying to get reactions out of them, get this on camera, making them look like bad people and how they react to him not wanting to hang out with him, and we've seen this many times with Dougie and Asher and Whitney. It also could just be Dougie is this huge loner and that he really is genuinely trying to hang out with them, and he's just getting rejected throughout this episode, like he did at the casino with Asher last episode, and they even show him crying here. So that makes me think it all isn't just about maybe him filming things that they don't know about. It's more like, no, he generally is a loner and wants to hang out with these people, and it's not happening, and he's also probably feeling a little lame for lying about the HGTV thing, if that's the case as well, in his crying in this episode. Now, it's interesting, we see Nala again, the girl who cursed Asher. We see her in school, and it's interesting when you think of the name Nala, because it represents Queen Lion, and we'll see in her house later that the painting of a lion is there next to her picture, so that's no coincidence, and it also means water in the desert. So I symbolically think that this show being in the desert, that Nala is the good in this show, and she senses the bad in these people. It's also sad to see her being laughed at by two girls in class, and what I loved is when she's now at home with her sister, that when they have the door knock and you hear the drilling, it's again like a horror movie, and it ends up just being Asher, but that's no coincidence. He is framed a lot like a horror villain. They are the horror villains of this show, Asher and Whitney. You even see later on when they're coming back to the house to see them, the way they are framed throughout the windows are foggy. It is a classic tease of a horror villain approaching, and they're doing it on those characters. That is not a coincidence. And Asher's like, oh, it's you. And he didn't even know now that this family was squatting on one of his properties, and it happens to be Nala. And he does a full sprint, so you just start laughing seeing Nathan Fielder doing a full sprint after these two girls. And a neighbor grabs him and calls the police, but the police will inform him that Nala's family's been squatting on his property, and Asher decides they can stay. So Asher's trying to change his image up a little bit. I love when he introduces himself to Abshir and he goes, hi, I'm Asher. And he says back, Abshir. And he's like, no, Asher. And he's like, Abshir, not getting that this is actually his name. I'm happy to see more of Barkhad Abdi, who was famous for Captain Phillips and getting nominated for an Oscar, because it seemed weird that he was in that episode for only a second. You're like, if it's him, it must be a bigger role than that. And now we're seeing that he is a big part in the show, which is good to see. And Whitney even says to Asher when he tells her that he's going to have them stay, she's like, this is so out of character for you. And he's like, money doesn't matter when it's about doing the right thing. What I love is it sets up for, as the episode goes on, Asher just going back to his old ways and who he really is as a person with money, which we'll see in times when she's suggesting that big moment where she's like, you know, this house needs a lot of renovation. She's like, it would cost like $5,000, $6,000. He somehow in his head justifies to even possibly bring it down to $500. And then we'll see when they give Fernando the security job and the coffee shop is closed, that she suggests a GoFundMe for the other workers who lost their jobs. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, that's a good thought and maybe a good idea down the road in the future. So just him being his normal ways, and how he talks about it being with the renovations for that family in that house they're squatting in, that it's a teardown and that there's no money coming back. So that's what he's thinking about at the end of it all. It's not actually really him being generally a good person and doing the right thing. And also Whitney catches him in one of his older lies, because she's like, wait a minute, didn't you say that girl said she was in transitional housing when you gave her the money? Because he never did find her and gave her the money. So I also think it's hysterical to see that when Dr. Brown gives Whitney the shot, he says, think of it as putting babies on hold. And Whitney says Asher can fill that role, and he does this cringy wah-wah baby cry, and it totally bombs. It's like him trying to be funny in reaction to the focus group saying he's not funny, and he continues not being funny, where the doctor and Whitney don't even respond to this. But it was interesting to note the doctor completely pauses at this ultrasound. That was strange, and it makes me wonder if something like Rosemary's Baby's going on here with this in her body. Remember, we saw that black circle in there. They might go that route. You never know with this team in this show, especially if it's called The Curse. There might have been more than just a tiny curse at play here. Could be with Asher's sperm, who knows? And you get this hysterical moment where Asher asks the doctor, during the interim period, is oral okay or finger penetration? Just so funny. I also thought it was interesting when they called Fernando to let him know that he wasn't gonna have a job at the coffee place, but they're offering him security now. Emma Stone is great in moments like this in the show playing Whitney, because she's pausing for a more enthusiastic response to him, like he should be excited and really jumping up for joy here. And I also love the moment that during this moment that's supposed to be very serious for someone like Fernando, who has a sick mother and needs work, that Asher is tickling Whitney while she's on the phone with him, and she starts laughing. And that's why he says, what's so funny? I thought that was actually a really powerful moment and says a lot about them too. And I also think it's interesting. He says, you want me there 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. The freaks come out at night. And I think that's connecting to, we'll see Asher and Whitney when they start yelling at each other, and Asher's behavior in particular in that scene, talking about the freaks coming out at night. And also a moment that's cringy here with Asher is Whitney reflecting that they should have just done all local shops in the show to support. But you see Asher's like, well, we needed to appeal to a national audience with that coffee shop. That just totally backfired. It's also interesting that Nala's sister is very upset when Whitney and Asher are allowed into their place. So it's that theme running too, where like kids, dogs, right, where there's a lot of barking when they're around. You hear in the background that they can just sense bad people. It's also interesting that when the dad is telling Whitney he's making hot dogs, she's like, do you make them with rice? And he's like, water. And she's like, oh, but you have veggies, right? And rice on the side. And he's like, buns. It's just showing you this different planet they are on. And Whitney has a lot of moments like this. She has it too when she notices that Abshir is having a lot of pain in his neck. She's like, oh, are you taking supplements like vitamin K? Like, yeah, this family who's squatting is going to Whole Foods and getting supplements that are extremely expensive. I doubt it. It's interesting that Nala also knew Whitney's name without her saying it, and they even talk about in this episode she could possibly be psychic, which I think she is. It's like the moment when Abshir says to Whitney, do we have to pay rent if you do this? And she says, no, you're staying here for free. But he's like, can you write that down for me that it's free? Because you can't trust anybody in that type of situation that you're in, and that they've probably had an experience where they were given a good deal and were fooled. Now Whitney says to Asher, she's talking about what needs to be fixed in this house. So Whitney says misagas, which means what they've done is crazy, senseless behavior. And that's when Asher corrects her and he's like, no, you meant to say mitzvah, which means you've done a good deed, a charitable deed. That's not a coincidence in the writing either, in her saying that. Now, Whitney sits with the sisters, and she's like, it was wrong for Asher not to give you the money. And she's like, well, that's why I tiny cursed him. So we learn it was a TikTok trend. But here's the thing. We don't see the tiny curse used in the sense that she used it with this chicken meal. And they're explaining it's like something small. You think of like someone's shoes being untied. And she explains what she thought with Asher was she took the chicken out of his dinner. And Asher's reaction is so great here. He's like, taking chicken out of people's dinners. They go, what was the dinner you took the chicken from? And she says chicken spaghetti. So Asher's reaction to this, Nathan Fielder, is just priceless. No one can do that kind of facial reaction like him. And with the horror music playing was great. But he'll go back home and then watch the TikTok trend of tiny curses, but there's none like she explained using chicken. It's all shoelaces. So that freaks him out. And throughout this scene that's about to play out at the end of this episode, Asher is still thinking about Nala and this family, what they could have done to him. And he says, at first, he doesn't even refer to her as her name, by the way. He says that girl was going through trash. How could she have known the meal? Now, what's interesting is when Whitney is stuck in her shirt and Asher pulls it off, this whole moment is actually a genuine moment between them that would have worked great on the show. And it's hysterical. They can't reenact it. It's so phony. It's literally Asher when the camera's on him becoming awkward as stiff as ever and Whitney becoming cringe as ever. And then he again brings up, they could have seen us talking about Nala's family through the kitchen window if they were going through the trash. And then Whitney says, you think that every disadvantaged person is a wild animal going through our garbage? And this is where Asher snaps. We see that Asher again that came out to the interviewer where he lost it. He's like, I'm not making assumptions about Abshir and his family. I would say the same exact thing if they were white. And he says, I take offense that you are not validating my feelings when I'm talking about this stuff. He's like, I could have said the same thing to you about you when you were talking about the little girl and that she could do a curse. But he's like, I give you the benefit of the doubt, but you never do it with me. And it hurts. So he's making himself the victim here in this situation. They get into this heated argument, and it's amazing to see Nathan Fielder. He's doing real acting here, real chops, holding his own with an amazing actress in Emma Stone. And it doesn't surprise me how good he is, because a lot of times comedic actors, comedians in general, are really good at transitioning dramatic acting. Look at Steve Carell, look at Jim Carrey, because comedians are usually the smartest of the bunch too, no offense to regular actors, and it records their argument the phone. So this is when Whitney is actually watching a reflection as something that is true to their relationship and how they are with each other, and she deletes it and keeps the phony one on her phone. Very interesting. And now you see Fernando doing his security shift at night, and he looks at the camera and it freezes there, and it almost breaks the fourth wall here. Fernando is looking at us, the audience. Like, this is really what goes on in these type of situations that he has been placed in. Remember, we opened the show with Fernando in a situation that looked hopeful. Now he's back almost feeling like he's probably doing a square one job here with a gun doing security outside of a store. That dream was all phony here with the coffee. This was a great episode. I thought it was very close to being as good as episode 1. A big step up over episode 2 to me. That could also be in part because this episode was also written by Nathan Fielder and Benny Safdie, like episode 1 was. Really good visuals here, amazing acting, and it had a much better pacing in episode 2 as well. So I'm going to give this one an 8.8. Let me know what you thought of it down below. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of The Curse. I'll be doing every single episode, and I'll see you next time.